Greetings, my fellow freedom lovers and sovereign thinkers. This is LL3's newest podcast. My name is Craig, and transmitting from the the northern panhandles of the Lone Star State, which is known as Texas, and Amarillo, to be exact. Today's date is Friday, June 6, 2014, and today I'm going to be discussing a few topics, but one of the things I like to address, which was a real, I can say, false flag terror attack that occurred on June 8th, 1967. And it was about on the USS Liberty. So, it'll be based on the website sixdaywar.org. So I'm going to be reading it and give you my intake plus a few other things I'm going to add to this particular segment, okay? As it reads, USS Liberty. This USS Liberty, a U.S. intelligence gathering ship, was steaming more than 10 miles off the coast of El Arish on June 8, 1967. The fourth day of the 6-year war, when at around 2 p.m. Sinai time, Israeli jets responding to reports of shelling from the sea attacked with cannon and napalm. Soon afterwards, Israeli torpedo boats arrived at the scene and also attacked after first being fired upon by the Liberty. Israeli seamen later explained they mistook the Liberty for an Egyptian ship, the El Cruiser. But when they realized their target was a U.S. ship, they ceased firing and offered assistance. Tragically, 34 U.S. personnel were killed in the attack and another 171 were wounded. Adding to the tragedy is that the Liberty should not have been there at all, with war already underway. It is ordered by U.S. commanders to stay 100 miles from the coast. But a series of mistakes by communications personnel delayed the message from reaching the ship until after the attack. The Israelis have always maintained that attack on the Liberty was a tragic mistake caused by the fog of war. They immediately apologized for the attack and later paid compensation to the families. But certain crewmen of the Liberty have charged that Israeli deliberately and knowingly attacked the U.S. ship, and have advanced increasingly complicated and even bizarre theories to explain Israel's alleged motivation for such an act. In addition, author James Bamford has cited similarly baseless and contradictory theories in his 2 books on the National Security Agency. The actual intelligence gathering by the Liberty was responsibly of NSA personnel. Some Liberty crewmen and like-minded conspiracists have also charged that the U.S. government, including the Congress, has failed to investigate the attack on the Liberty. In fact, contrary to these claims, there have been at least 6 government investigations which reach relevant conclusions as to the fact of the attacks. Those investigations and their results are as follows. CIA report on June 13th, 1967. Conclusion: no malice, attack, and mistake. U.S. Navy Court of Inquiry. Date issued June 18, 1967. Mistaken identity. Report by Clark Clifford. July 18, 1967. No evidence ship was known to be American. Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. 79 and 81. No merit to claims. Attack was intentional. National Security Agency. 1981. Mistaken identity. House Armed Service Committee, 91 and 92. No support for claims. Attack was intentional. The last investigation was spurred by White House Chief of Staff John Sununu, who, after meeting with the Liberty veterans, referred them to Nick Mavroles, chairman of the Subcommittee on Investigations of the House Armed Services Committee. After a 1-year investigation, the matter was closed. The investigators evidently finding nothing to support conspiracy claims or any Israeli intentions to attack a U.S. ship, which is from the U.S. Liberty incident, the 1967 attack on the U.S. Navy spy ship by Judge A.J. Crystal Potomac, claimed by certain USS Liberty crewmen versus their sworn testimony. It is instructive to compare some of the claims by conspiracists, including some of the crew members, with sworn testimony by those same crew members. For example, crew member Lloyd Painter claimed in History Channel documented that he saw unmarked jets, no markings whatsoever passed over the ship, thus clearly implying that attack was intentional and premeditated. Painter's claimed contradictions is sworn testimony before the U.S. Navy Court of Inquiry, in which he makes no such assertion. Lieutenant Painter testified under oath that as the jets first strafed the ship, which would be before they passed over the ship, he was looking through the porthole at the gun mounts. I was looking through the porthole when I was trying to contact these two kids, and I saw them both. Well, I didn't exactly see them as such. They were blown apart, but I saw the whole area go up in smoke and shattered metal. And at about the same time, the aircraft strafed the bridge area itself. The quartermaster third class Pollard was standing right next to me, and he was hit evidently with flying glass from the porthole. We both hit the deck, as well as Mr. O'Malley, who was my Jude, J-O-O-D that is, at the time. As soon as the first strafing raid had been made, we sounded general quarters alarm. The captain was on the bridge. He was in the pilot house at this time. I don't know whether he was hit then or not. I can't remember. It was so smoky. I took off from my general quarters station, which I said before was repair 3 on my mess decks. On the way down, I was running as fast as I could. Testimony of LT Lieutenant Jag Lloyd C. Painter, June 14th, 1967. Thus, according to Lieutenant Painter's testimony, he was looking at the Liberty gun mounts as the jets attacked, at which point he quite understandably hit the deck. When the first strafing ran was over, Lieutenant Painter ran as fast as he could to his station below decks. Here, he was therefore in no position to determine whether the attack jets were marked or unmarked. At no point in his testimony did he claim that the jets were unmarked or even that he was in a position to tell. Contrary to Lieutenant Painter's claim that the attacking jets were unmarked, Signalman Russell David testified that he saw Israeli insignia on the attacking jets and reported this to the captain. Most conspiracy theorists have ignored David's testimony. Conspiracy theorists have also ignored Jackson McGonagall's sworn testimony that the attacking torpedo boats were flying Israeli flags. When the boats reached an approximate range of 2,000 yards, the center boat of the formation was signaling to us. Also at the range, it appeared that they were flying an Israeli flag. This was later verified. It was not possible to read the signals from the center torpedo because of the intermittent blocking of view by smoke and flames. At this time, I yelled to Machine Gun 51 to tell him to hold fire. I realized that there was a possibility of the aircraft having been Israeli and the attack had been conducted in error. That's the sworn testimony by Commander William McGonagall, June 14, 1967. Emphasis added. Claims have been made by Mr. Painter that Israeli torpedo boats machine-gunned Liberty life rafts that had been placed in the waters, which, if true, could be a violation of the laws of war. Painter, I climbed the ladder and opened the hatch and looked out to the sea, and what I saw was Israeli torpedo boats machine gunning on our life rafts in the water as they floated behind our ship. But once again, Mr. Painter contradicts both his own sworn testimony before the court of inquiry and that of his captain. The court's opening question to Lieutenant Painter after name, rank, and organization was, on June 8, 1967, at about 1400 hours, an incident occurred aboard the USS Liberty in which the vessel was attacked. Would you please relate to the court of inquiry what you recall concerning that incident? Nowhere in his response did Lieutenant Painter mention anything about the Israeli attacks on life rafts in the water. On the contrary, he testified that most of the life rafts had been damaged and set alight during the prior jet attacks on the ship, and that his crew pushed many of these burning life rafts overboard. At this time, after the torpedo attack, the DC Central passed the word to prepare to abandon ship. We then filed out to our life rafts, which were no longer with us because they had been strafed, and most of them were burned. So we knocked most of them over the side, all during the time there's time in repair. 3, my men were fighting fires and knocking burning life rafts, etc. What possible reason could Lieutenant Painter have had for admitting in his testimony the change which he now makes? Israel attacked the Liberty lifeboats after they were put in the water. Why does he now fail to mention, in fact, in his crew pushed the burning life rafts overboard? Whatever the reason for the divergence between Mr. Painter's present claims and his testimony, Captain McNaugle also never mentioned any attack on lifeboats during his testimony. On the contrary, he testified that after the torpedo attack, some crewmen mistakenly put lifeboats in the water and that he ordered them to stop because the ship was in danger of sinking. No bodies were noted in the vicinity of the ship following the explosion. Several life rafts, however, were released and placed into the water by various crew members whom I was unable to communicate with prior to their placing the boats in the water. They exercised their initiative on the scene, and no fault can be found with their estimate, not having the information that I had. When the messenger was sent to tell them to leave the lifeboats alone, that the ship was in no danger of sinking at that time, but that the lifeboats might be needed at a later time, no additional lifeboats were placed in the water. That was from, of course, Commander McNaugle. And we just proceed here. Alright. We proceed here. Most historians would agree. Right. Does it seem reasonable Commander McGoggle had mentioned in his testimony that placing the lifeboats in the water would somehow forget to tell the court of inquiry that these lifeboats were then attacked? Most historians will agree that it is a highly improper to allow someone who has testified under oath, like Mr. Painter, to later contradict that testimony in an article or documentary without informing readers or viewers of the contradiction, and without vigorously confronting the person to explain the contradiction. Unfortunately, few writers of the Liberty incident have done so. One of the key charges leveled by conspiracy theorists and some of the crew members is that Israeli jets and torpedo boats could not have missed the Liberty's U.S. flag, and therefore must have attacked knowing the ship was American. James Ennis Jr., a lieutenant on the Liberty, one of the leading conspiracy proponents, makes his point repeatedly in his book, Assault on the Liberty. It is therefore quite ironic that Mr. Ennis also argues in his book it would have been impossible for Commander McGoggle to recognize the flags and markings on the Israeli boats. McGoggle must have been mistaken about sighting the Israeli flag at this point in the attack. For one thing, it would have been practically impossible to identify a tiny and wildly fluttering Star of David a mile away, particularly since any flags displayed by torpedo boats would have streamed back away from McGoggle and out of his own line of sight. That's from his book, Assault on Liberty, page 149. Commander McGoggle, who had binoculars, obviously did not agree. In addition, the Israeli jets attacked the Liberty along the length of the ship so that Liberty's flag would have been streamed back away from the line of sight of the pilots. Mr. Ennis has also made the absurd claim that some sort of Israeli jamming prevented the Liberty from transmitting or receiving any signals during most of the time the ship was under attack. While we are trying to send our message for help, there was some sort of obvious jamming. There was a buzz sound that blocked all of our frequencies. Jamming scene covered everything at all times unless the very few seconds that missiles were in the air, then it stopped, and during those times they got out our message. Okay, keep on going. Mr. Ennis' assertion raises an obvious question. According to Ennis and many conspiracists, the Liberty was attacked to prevent from intercepting sensitive Israeli radio messages. By what? By why would the Israeli brothers attack the ship? As Ennis claims, they were able to jam all the Liberty frequencies. Why not jam the frequencies to avoid the risk of attacking a U.S. ship? It should also be noted that Ennis' claim that the Liberty outgoing signals were jammed is physically impossible. The Liberty would have been able to send a distress call, no matter what jamming the Israelis might have attempted. Technical reason is that incoherent radiation sources cannot interfere with each other. Most conspiracy theorists also charge that the Israeli torpedo boats fired first, and only then did the Liberty fire back. Commander McDougall explicitly stated in his sworn testimony that the Liberty fired first, even as he recognized the boat as Israeli and tried to get his gunners to hold their fire. McDougall, in later moments of the air attack, it was noted that 3 high-speed boats were approaching from the ship from the northeast on a relative bearing of approximately 135 at a distance about 15 miles. The ship at the time was still on course 263 true, speed unknown, but believed to be excess of 5 knots. At no time did the ship stop during the air attack. It is believed that the time of initial sightings of the torpedo boats, the time was about 14:20. The boats appeared to be in a wedge-type formation with the center boat, the lead point of the wedge. Estimate speeds of the boats was about 27 to 30 knots. They appeared to be about 150 to 200 yards apart. It appeared that they were approaching the ship in a torpedo launch attitude. And since I did not have direct communication with gun control or gun mounts, I told the man from the bridge, whose identity I don't recall, to proceed Mount 51 and take the boats under fire. The boats continued to approach the ship at high speed and on a constant bearing with decreasing range. About this time, I noticed that our ensign had been shot away during the air attack and ordered David signalman to hoist a signal ensign from the yardarm. During the air attack, our normal ensign was flying. Before the torpedo attack, a holiday-size ensign was hoisted on readable standby for torpedo attack from starboard. I did not have an accurate ship's position at this time, but I knew that to the left of the ship's course at the time lie shallow waters, and by turning to the left, I would be approaching land closer. That had been given me in directives which I held in that instant in time. I realized that if I attempt to turn starboard, I would expose a later target to the torpedo boats. I elected to maintain heading of 283 yards at maximum speed. When the boats reached an approximate range of 2,000 yards, the center boat of the formation was signaling to us. Also, at this range, it appeared they were flying an Israeli psych flag. This was later verified. It was not possible to read the signals from the center torpedo boat because of the intermittent blocking of the view by smoke and flames at this time. I yelled to Machine Gun 51 to tell him to hold fire. I realized that there was a possibility of the aircraft had been an Israeli and the attack had been conducted in error. I wanted to hold fire to see if we could read the signal from the torpedo boat and perhaps avoid additional damage and personnel injuries. The man on the machine gun 51 fired a shot burst at the boats before he was able to understand what I was attempting to have him do. Instantly, on machine gun 51 opening fire, machine gun 53 began firing at the center boat from the starpoint wing of the bridge. 03 level, I observed that the fire from machine gun 53 was extremely effective and blanketed the area and the center torpedo boat. It was not possible to get the amount 53 from the starboard wing of the bridge. I sent Mr. Lucas around the port side of the bridge, around to the skylights, to see if he could tell Quintero, whom I believe to be the gunner on machine gun 53, to hold fire until we are able to clarify the situation. He reported back in a few minutes in the fact that he saw no one at Mount 53. As far as the torpedo boats were concerned, I am sure that they felt they were under fire from the USS Liberty. At this time, they opened fire with their gun mounts. In a matter of seconds, one torpedo was noted crossing astern of the ship at about 25 yards. The Israelis have stated when that torpedo boats realized the Liberty was a U.S. ship, they stopped the attack and offered assistance. Mr. Ennis has termed to this is purest of baloney. They claim that they came alongside and immediately offering help. Well, that is purest baloney. Instead of offering help, they circled us several times, machine gunning anything that moved, pulled down, came in, machine gunned the life rafts and the water. Despite Mr. Ennis' denial, the captain testified that the Israelis did indeed offer help. McGonagall. Immediately after the ship was struck by the torpedo boat stopped dead in the water and miled around astern of the ship at a range of approximately 500 to 800 yards. One of the boats signaled by flashing light in English, "Do you require assistance?" This was confirmed under oath by Chief Communication Technician Harold J. Thompson. Thompson said, "I was asked to report to the bridge, which I did. When I got up there, Signalman David was attempting to rig a hand light. I assisted him. We went to the starboard wing of the bridge, and one torpedo boat was making a run straight at us of the starboard beam, while the other two stood off. At the captain's direction, David sent U.S. Naval ship. When they were about 500 yards off, the torpedo boat turned astern and came up on the stem on the starboard side and flashed, 'Do you need help?' The captain said, 'No, thank you.' We sent this back to the boat and saw the last part of that message. 'Do you want us to stand by?' I passed this word to the captain. He said, 'No, thank you.' We sent this off to the patrol boat, then came to the port, along the port side. I say roughly 100 yards off, flashed 'Good luck,' disappeared. This was the last we saw of them. In addition, note that contrary to Ennis's claims, neither the captain nor Chief Communications Technician Thompson mentioned any Israeli machine guns on a Liberty after the torpedo attack. On the contrary, they both recounted Israeli offers of assistance. Then they somehow failed to notice that the Israelis kept machine gunning anything that moved. Or did Mr. Ennis once again lie? Another claim by some conspiracy theorists is that Israel attacked the Liberty to prevent the U.S. from learning about Israel's plans to attack Syria. This is nonsense for at least two reasons. One, at this location off El Arish, the Liberty was in no position to eavesdrop on any Israeli plans concerning Syria, because such plans would not have been discussed over the Israeli communications net so far to the south. Two, on June 8th at 11:30 a.m., before the Liberty was attacked, Israeli Chief of Military Intelligence briefed the U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Walworth Barbour, and President Johnson's close aide, Henry McPherson. According to Ambassador Barbour's now declassified cable summarizing that briefing, the Israelis told the Americans that, in principle, the task of the IDF now was to exploit its success. They still remain the Syrian problem, and perhaps it was necessary to give Israel a blow to get more, quote, elbow room, unquote. Obviously, the Israelis would not have attacked an American ship to hide their intentions to retaliate against Syria. If they had already revealed those intentions to senior American representatives, The Israeli jets that attacked the Liberty were diverted from other targets and consequently were armed with napalm rather than iron bombs. In a premeditated and deliberate attack meant to sink a ship, no aviator in the world would choose napalm over iron bombs. In the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, for example, iron bombs sank U.S. battleships in minutes. In the Liberty, a converted freighter was no battleship. Friendly fire, mistaken attacks, allies, or one's own forces are an unfortunate reality of war. For an example, of the 24 British soldiers killed in the Gulf War, 9 were the result as a mistaken U.S. attack. As an Associated Press, August 28, 1992. The U.S. air attack on British armored personnel carrier in broad daylight bore eerie similarities to the Liberty incident, according to the report in the Washington Post. They have been killed on a clear day well behind Allied front line while awaiting instructions and relaxing their vehicles, inside their vehicles. British officials contend that 2 American pilots whose air-launched Maverick missiles turned a pair of vehicles into human incinerators either ignore radio instructions or misread map coordinates. The pilots of an A-10 tank-busted warplane contended they never received the coordinates and relied instead on information passed by a fellow American F-16 jet fighter pilot as he left the area for refueling. The conflict between the two accounts that has left the parents puzzled and angry, their outrage compounded by the refusal of the U.S. government to provide direct testimony from the pilots to a coroner's inquest taking place here, and by Britain's refusal to press the case. Washington Post, May 18, 1992. 1 week earlier, the New York Times had reported the American pilots say they mistook the 2 British armored vehicles for Iraqi tanks because they were not displaying colored panels or other markings identified them as Allied vehicles. The British Defense Ministry, as well as witnesses and hearings, insisted all of the vehicles, 30 tons armored personnel carriers called Warriors, were clearly shown friendly markings. When the first missile hit, Lance Captain Peter Fife said at an inquest on Friday, the men had just returned to the vehicle after stretching their legs. Suddenly, there was a tremendous explosion. My mates were screaming and my hair was on fire and pieces of shrapnel were in my thighs, said Corporal Fife, who was badly wounded. 3 or 4 minutes later, a second missile slammed into another vehicle. That's in the New York Times, May 11th, 1992. How could U.S. pilots misidentify the attack in British armored vehicles in broad daylight in the desert? It is possible they couldn't tell the difference between the APCs of our British NATO allies and the Soviet supply one used by Iraq. How could they use the special markers that identified the vehicles as British? The answer, of course, is that in the fog of war, U.S. pilots missed the markers by mistake and misidentified the British armored vehicle, just like the Israelis who missed the flag, which was hanging down in still air. The USS Liberty misidentified her as an Egyptian ship. Another instructive example of mistaken attack occurred on June 2, 1967, just a few days before the Liberty incident, but this involved a U.S. attack against a Russian freighter, Turkestan, in the northern Vietnamese harbor of Kamchatka. According to the Soviet captain of the vessels as quoted in Crystal, we are bearing all the markings of the Soviet government. A Soviet flag was flying from the stern mast. The stack was painted with a red stripe and a hammer and sickle. The visibility was excellent. There was no possibility about talking about an accidental attack. This is from Crystal, page 4 through 5. Secretary of Defense McNamara mentioned this incident in testimony to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee in 1967. This is from Secretary McNamara. In case of the attack of the Liberty, it was the conclusion of the investigatory body headed by the Admiral of the Navy, in whom we have confidence that the attack was not intentional. I read the record of the investigation and support that conclusion. It was not a conscious decision on the part of either government of Israel. Senator Hickenlooper, perhaps not. Secretary McNamara says, continuing to attack a U.S. vessel. Secretary McNamara said, no, there is no evidence that the individuals attacking the Liberty knew they were attacking the U.S. ship, and there is some evidence, circumstantial, that they did not know. Secretary McNamara, Senator Hickenlooper, I don't want to carry the torch for the Israeli. It was an excusable error in judgment. And he continues here, in an inexcusable error of professional tactics, I would simply point out to you that, at the same time, I was denying that we had struck a Russian ship in Haiphong Harbor, and I proved to be an error. These errors do occur. We had no more intention of attacking a Russian ship that Israel apparently did the attacking on an American ship. It's from Crystal, page 156. Another claim by conspiracy theorists, especially John Bourne, author of the USS Liberty, Dissenting History versus Official History, concerns U.S. carrier pilots who were allegedly called back after they had been taken off to help the Liberty during the attack. Bourne claimed that the pilots were so upset at this that although on active duty, they wrote a magazine article about this, a most unusual action. And he indicates a footnote, number 27, that the supposed article appeared in a magazine called Counterattack. In the footnote, Bourne also asserts, in classical conspiratorial style, the article was in July 1967. All copies around that date are missing in New York libraries, and I have not yet been able to locate other copies. Has Bourne never heard of interlibrary loan? Harvard has the magazine. It is in its Widener Library. It's a journal of the far right alleging communist conspiracies under every bed. While there is no mention of the attack of the Liberty in the issue of July 14, 1967. There was no article written by pilots or any other personnel involved in the way with the Liberty incident. Mr. Bourne claims that the U.S. pilot wrote an article in this magazine is pure fantasy. Here's an appendix or an extension. Disturbing statements of a leading Liberty crewman. James Ennis, perhaps the leading conspiracy proponent among the former Liberty crewmen, has made extreme anti-Jewish and anti-Israeli statements in email discussions on the Prodigy Internet service. For example, in the message dated June 8, 1992, referring to Jews, Mr. Ennis stated, considered their dilemma for generations. They wanted their own country as a haven from racists. They finally got it. Gradually, they learned that their leaders obtained a new country by murdering and frightening away the original owners. Gradually, they learned that their new leaders were actually the worst kind of self-centered and moralistic murderers, worse than the people they sought to flee from. There is too much of moral dilemma for many of them. Some drew silent. Others turned against the people who betrayed them and now led their new country. Others pretended that all was well and that the new country was surrounded by extremists and that the conditions justified every kind of brutal access. Psych. And over the years, they have instilled this narrow view in their children who now accept it as a religious dogma, and it's a very sad situation indeed. Of course, the people that Jews fled from the first and foremost the Nazis. So Mr. Ennis is saying that the Israeli leaders are amoralistic murderers or who are worse than the Nazis. Another message dated July 22nd, 1992, Mr. Ennis stated, the fact is Israel will have no enemies if they did not constantly raid their neighbors, steal their land, take their water, and kill their children. Mr. Ennis' statements are nonsense copied directly from his apparent good friends in the pro-Arab propaganda industry. Clearly, before the attack of Liberty, Mr. Ennis was not an extreme anti-Israel partisan. He has become one since. His allegations concerning Libya must be viewed in that unpleasant context. Yeah, it's pretty interesting about the whole 6-Day War, but like the whole USS Liberty, I do see some smoking guns. This is actually from the camera. Committee for Accuracy in the Middle East reporting in America. But I am going to post this up, and I've got another link here too. which is about the Liberty incident. I'm going to add that on there. Plus, I'm going to try to get a documentary on it on YouTube about the USS Liberty. And another thing, too, I would recommend, I'm going to attempt to find the link from federaljack.com. Actually, this gentleman named Popeye is based out of South Florida, Miami to be exact, does interviews with surviving crewmen from the USS Liberty in their own words. So you'll go to federaljack.com or just type in down the rabbit hole with Popeye, and you can probably get his links, or go to truthfrequencyradio.com. So I want to attempt to get that in there as well, because it's a very interesting story how the crew people actually survived. And in addition, there's even other reports too that even some of the Israeli pilots came out and said, yeah, we informed their comrades. They informed their comrades it was an American ship, but they still said attack it anyway. In addition, there's even a claim that Lyndon B. Johnson wanted to sink the goddamn ship. That was one of his quotes. You probably looked at on Terror Storm by Alex Jones and verified with some of the links, because they are considered declassified as well. So always observe responsibly to that, okay? All right. Next thing I'm going to be doing, see how many I could suck in here. Next one here came from University of Michigan. Actually Susan Pazzo from Occupies Corporatism, and she good site, she's a decent investigative reporter, and she did an article today on June 6th. It's entitled University of Michigan Building Fake City to Test Self-Driving Cars. Let's see what it says here. As it reads, University of Michigan Engineer College is actually building a fake urban city on 32 acres of land in the southeastern part of the state to test the safety and security of self-driving cars. This city is being affectionately called the Automated Vehicle Testing Site Facility, that will be under the oversight of the UN Mobility Transformation Center. This real-life virtual city will include traffic lights, intersections, traffic signs, and other road signs, sidewalks, buildings, railroad crossing, construction sites, roundabouts, merging lanes. The only thing that will be missing from the city is pedestrians, heavy traffic, and businesses. These false streetlights will be programmable, as well as mechanical pedestrians that will surprise the driverless vehicles as they pass through. In order to safely test SDCs, UM have decided to construct a fake city that would facilitate a variety of different traffic options without concern for accidents or pedestrians who might be hurt during the testing by an SDC running a red light or barreling through an intersection. Peter Sweatman, director of MTC and the UN Transportation Research Institute, TRC, okay, UN, I like that, New World Order, baby, woo, said the College of Engineering brings expertise in robotics and how to test sophisticated machines. Last month, Google announced they are building their own line of SDCs, complete with stop-button controls, no steering wheel or pedals, and a city car-friendly style that is being designed to be appealing to people. This two-seater car will propel by electricity and limited to 25 miles per hour to help ensure safety. It looks like a monorail. Sounds like a monorail. If there is a problem, the driver can take over with the plug, and then is expected to be removed once the customer confidence in the technology is solidified. In September, the California Department of Motor Vehicles will begin issuing driver's licenses to driverless cars with human co-pilots for only $150. This fee includes 10 vehicles and no more than 20 test drivers. Good benefit. Google will benefit from this development as they perfect their newly created SDC. Well, let's see what they have. They have a YouTube link. Let's see what they got. Wait, hold on here. They took it off. Oh, what about the scumbags? Okay, well, we gotta look that up first. But, yep. More of more dependency for your life. That's the whole thing. More like so-called Project Venus to an extent. And it may sound good, but always got to say that when you have too much reliance on all these too many automations and having people drive for you and all that, you can condition and maybe have your body stagnate. But it is a lot of flaw. It could be a huge fallacy for a sovereign thinking, self-reliant individual. So yeah, it is pretty odd. And of course, they're going to try to do the whole robotics movement, artificial companions, by this article. So I would say this: instead of building these big cities, fake cities, let's use it for farming purposes only. I think that'd be more sufficient, and everyone needs to learn how to learn to upgrade themselves with agricultural skills. This includes myself, so I will admit that as well. And that's just pretty chilling to an extent. Google, New World Order, UN, Transportation Research Institute. Woo, yeah. All hail the big brother. All right. Next one here is from, actually, yeah, it's a good one here. This is from truthout.org. And it's entitled Lawmakers Push Back Against Administration's Failed Latin America Policy. This was written by Mike Weisbart, from The Hill to be exact. That's just a little break this up a little bit. And as it reads, in a remarkable eruption of sanity in Washington, there is finally some pushback from Congress against the far right and center on U.S. policy toward Venezuela and Latin America. Something that has not happened under McCarthyite Paul that has prevailed for years. A letter from members of Congress to President Obama, which the letter is a link, last Tuesday expressed strong opposition to legislation that will impose economic sanctions against Venezuelan officials in an election year in which there is nothing for politicians to gain for standing by up to bullies of the recently merged anti-Cuban, anti-Venezuelan lobbies. This is significant, but even more striking were some of the points in that letter made by U.S. policy in the region. Members of Congress note that the U.S. government typically take Europeans and African governments' opinions into account in those regions and put forth the proposition that could do the same for Latin America. Now, this might seem like a no-brainer, but the White House and State Department routinely take decisions and actions on regional issues without any consultation whatsoever with other governments. Secretary of State John Kerry's initial decision to not recognize last year's presidential election results in Venezuela, which he later reversed under pressure from South America, comes to mind as an example. The U.S. government's numerous actions in support of the 2009 coup government in Honduras, which were vehemently opposed in the region, are another example of unilateral actions that cause much resentment in the hemisphere. In a move sure to infuriate the right, the letter was also called for the Obama administration to accept Venezuela's ambassador to appoint one for Venezuela. The members of Congress also noted the Union of South American Nations, the Caribbean Community, and the Organization of American States by 2093 have all issued statements, in a various ways supportive of the Venezuelan government and that call for respect of the country's democratic institutions. A number of presidents and governments, including Michelle Bachelet of Chile, have publicly warned against attempts to forcibly remove the democratically elected government of Venezuela. Again, and this is an attempt to insert the views of the majority of governments in the hemisphere into the public discourse, a rarity in Congress. UNASUR, or UNASUR, issued a statement last week that rejects the initiative. The initiative that continues trying to impose unilateral sanctions on the Venezuelan government officials, which violates the principle of non-intervention in the internal affairs of the other states and adversely affects this dialogue, is an obstacle to the Venezuelan people in overcoming their difficulties through independence, peace, and democracy. What makes this congressional letter so important that it is the first recognition by members of Congress, including Democratic relationships such as Chief Deputy Whip Representative Jan Schakowsky from Illinois, Representative John Conyers from Michigan, ranking Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee, Representative Jim McGovern from Massachusetts, co-chair of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission, that U.S. hostility towards Venezuela is isolating Washington in the hemisphere. Of course, anyone who has not been in a coma for the past 12 years should know this, but U.S. foreign policy is all about denial. This particular initiative to impose economic sanctions on Venezuelan government officials comes from far right of the political spectrum here. An alliance of neoconservatives and the anti-Cuban, anti-Venezuela lobby, the Obama administration opposed these sanctions in a May 8th Senate hearing on the legislation, which the May 8th Senate hearing is linked. The hearing was sometimes of a circus when only certified haters of Venezuela invited to testify. Not surprising, because the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Robert Menendez, Democrat from New Jersey, is a hardliner obsessed with regime change in Cuba. He has been involved in a couple of influence peddling scandals in the past year, with one of his major campaign contributors, a Miami doctor for whom the senator has done favors, saying a national record of more than $20 million received from Medicare in 1 year. The setting national record is linked there as well. Anything that's considered red will be linked, so I don't have to repeat myself like a broken record. Alright. The split between the Obama administration and various dinosaurs in Congress mirrored a split within the opposition in Venezuela. Testifying to the Senate, the top U.S. State Department official for the hemisphere, Roberta Jacobson, opposed the sanctions on the grounds that their allies in Venezuela were against them. Senators like Menendez and Marco Rubio, by contrast, were more sympathetic to those in the opposition who boycotted dialogue and sought to overthrow the government. Well, I say Menendez and Rubio should do it themselves, glam boy chicken hawks. But this split is largely a tactical force, at least in Washington, and the U.S. Secretary of the State, John Kerry, has gone back and forth between supporting either faction or the opposition. Recently, he hinted that he could possibly support the sanctions. That's what happened when you're a member of the CFR. I'll be right back. Alright, I will proceed. Washington's efforts to destabilize the government of Venezuela over the past 12 years have never been an isolated series of events, but part of an overall strategy of containment and rollback in the region. To this day, foreign policy establishment here has still not accepted that the region shifts toward more independent and left governments is a permanent change, like a move away from dictatorships in the last decade of the 20th century. Of course, Venezuela is a big target because it sits on the world's largest oil reserves and will therefore always be the most important player in the region. But Washington would like to get rid of all the left governments, and these people see this as a realistic intermediate to long-term goal. Further, for these reasons, last week's congressional letter is a breakthrough that recognizes that U.S. Venezuela policy is part of an overall strategy that has increasingly isolated the U.S. in the region. The U.S. does not have ambassadorial relations with Bolivia and Ecuador as well as Venezuela, and its relation to Brazil has been a low point for decades, far worse than during the Bush years. If these members of Congress provoke a new debate, it is the one that the Obama administration and its allies to the right will surely lose. Bravo! I have to agree with this gentleman, because the fact is, my friends, the United States should never be an empire, period. And I have stressed this even with the Federalist and Anti-Federalist papers, even though they had a lot of disagreements. But the fact is this: they have always supported a republic, not an empire. Of course, you always have a handful in there in the early days of the United States government do have a fetish of being imperialistic. But the whole thing is, we need a butt out of everyone's lives. That's been a big problem, and blowback's always been an issue. Let's instead of ramrodding freedom to these nations, let's inspire them, give them the facts, give them honor, knowledge, and wisdom. Because the people who will suffer from these sanctions will be the citizens themselves within those nations. So I'm glad that the Latin American policy, these sanctions did drop. I'm very pleased with that, because I was totally against it. Because if you're going to do sanctions on a nation, that's another move of the declaration of war, plain and simple. Because like they said, sanctions is considered war, an alternative to war. Thomas Jefferson made a statement like that too. Okay, so next one. I know right now as we speak is we do have a severe weather watch, but I'm okay right now. And next one we're gonna be hitting will be. I'll be right back. I'm gonna take a leak. Alright, I'm back. Sorry about that. A little delay there. Yeah, next one gonna be reading. Came out yesterday to be exact, by the Testosterone Pit. And I like to say where the truth comes out from the roost. Okay, let me just do this. I'm gonna do a little RSS feed on here for these folks. Yeah, why not? Good stuff. Bam. This one's entitled Giant Sucking Sound. Russian money yanked from U.S. banks. Plus, before I proceed, I like to thank Blacklisted News for sharing that also. Okay, it says here, U.S. banks enjoyed more or less steadily climbing, or rather soaring. Deposits by Russian institutions and individuals have tripled in 2 years to $21.6 billion in February, according to the U.S. Treasury. It may seem a bit counterintuitive that in times of ZERP, anyone would put any money in any U.S. banks, and it may seem even more counterintuitive that Russians have other opportunities with their money, would voluntarily subject themselves to the Fed's financial repression. But from the Russian point of view, earning near zero interest on their deposits in the U.S. and losing money slowly to inflation must have seemed preferable to what they thought might happen to their money in Mother Russia. Money that isn't nailed down has been fleeing Russia for years, even if it ends up in places like Cyprus, where much of it sank into the cesspool of corruption that were the Cypriot banks, which finally collapsed and took that Russian money down with them. By comparison, the U.S. must have seemed like a decent place to stash some liquid billions. But in March, the Ukrainian debacle burst into the foreground with Russia's annexion of Crimea, which wasn't very well received in the West. The U.S. and European governments rallied to the cause after vociferously clamoring for a sanction spiral. They actually imposed some sanctions, ineffectual or not, that including a blacklisting of some Russian oligarchs and their moolah. So in March, without waiting for the sanctions to spiral kick in, Russians yanked their moolah out of the U.S. banks. Deposits by Russians in U.S. banks suddenly plunged from $21.6 billion to $8.4 billion. They yanked out 61% of the deposits in just 1 month. They learned their lesson in Cyprus the hard way. Get your money out while you can before it gets confiscated. And they have a little data from the U.S. Department of Treasury. And as we go down here, they certainly didn't wait long to move the bulk of their money to other jurisdictions, those they believe perhaps erroneously to be beyond the reach of long and sinewy arm of the U.S. government. Will Russia bring their deposit in U.S. banks to zero? The Treasury will publish the April numbers in a few weeks, but zero seems unlikely because they'll need some pocket money to operate it in the U.S. Is the Russian run on American banks going to cause the collapse of the U.S. financial system, or at least of a bank, or at the very least make the bank shudder at its foundations? These 21.6 billion in deposits represent about 1% of the nearly 2 trillion in foreign non-negotiable deposits at U.S. banks, and even more minuscule share of domestic deposits, some of which end up parked at the Fed as excess reserves. Heck, the Fed is in infinite wisdom printed $4 trillion over the last 5 years, so that measly 21.6 billion isn't even a rounding error on that scale. None of these sanctions are working all that well, despite the moves by the West to isolate Russia, ExxonMobil, BP, Total, and other major oil companies. Other oil majors are doubling down in Russia. They just signed mega contracts with state-owned Russian oil companies. Sanctions be damned. Read, Exxon, BP defied Obama. Extended partnership with Russia. Let's check that out for a moment. Yeah, that article came out the 27th of May, and that's from Nick Cunningham, oilprice.com. But I'll let you guys read it. Hey, the whole thing is this. Like I said before, if you're going to do sanctions, create sanctions on a certain country, you're declaring war, and anything else can happen. So when you take a big amount from that bank, yeah, the sucking machine it is. So the whole thing is, look. What happened in Crimea is their business. Alright? And the fact is, like I repeat it all this time, they're just, some of the countries of the West are pissed off, excuse my language, they're infuriated because a great amount of them want to control Ukraine based on the grand chessboard game or the book by Zbigniew Brzezinski. So, as far as I'm concerned, you know what? Let's respect each other instead of playing this little stupid game about I'll play in my sandbox, but I'm going to take yours too. It's getting old and stagnantly pathetic. Alright? Okay, well, my last one for the day. This is from OklahomaWatchdog.org. Came out yesterday too. And it's Governor Fallin. Fallin signs bill repealing Common Core. Oklahoma City. Governor Mary Fallin on Thursday repealed the state's controversial Common Core curriculum. The federal overreach tainted a Common Core program created with well-intentioned goals, Fallin said. President Obama and Washington bureaucrats have usurped Common Core in an attempt to influence state education standards. Common Core state standards will be replaced with new, more rigorous standards by August 2016, according to House Bill 3399, signed by Fallin. The governor has not decided whether to seek a waiver from federal strictures to support the process defined in the bill. Her staff said, "We are capable of developing our economic standard that will be better than Common Core," Fallin said in a prepared statement after signing the bill. The federal government might threaten to pull education funds because of Fallin's repeal, as Common Core supporters warned, but the governor and her spokesman, Alex Wines, stressed that if the state is deprived from any federal monies, it will be only a portion of total. The measure has passed overwhelmingly in both chambers of the legislature, 78-19 in the House, 31-10 in the Senate, on the final day of session. Okay. Thank you. And the list goes on. The whole message is this: 10th Amendment. 10th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. They did their job, and you know what? If Washington D.C. gonna hold money, who cares? Because the truth of the matter is, the people of the United States, that's their own tax money. So technically, people who live in the United States, hey, that's our money, not Washington's. So you know what? I'm glad it got repealed, because Common Core is nothing more than a sham. It deprives individualism and creative control. All right, so I'll give her the thumbs up for signing it, and even the House and Senate that supports on repealing this deception. So thumbs up, homage to you folks. All right. Okay, cool. So that would be all for now. And you know what? I'm going to be adding something here. I'm going to be adding a link to from the Corbett Report. I'm going to type this in right now. It's about Libya. The whole thing was going on in Libya. Very, very interesting stuff. How the Libyan tribes want to get their country back from Al Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood, which many of us have knowledge is part of the New World Order agenda. So I'm gonna do that for sure. And it actually is an interview that happened on June 5th by James Corbett. Great guy. It's Libya update with James and JoAnne Moriarty and Furaj Muftah. So I'm definitely going to add that to the link as well. So that'd be pretty cool, because I heard it's a real good interview. I'm going to have to hear it again. So that's it, folks. I'd like to thank for you guys take the time to listen to the show. And what you can do, you can send your comments, middle fingers, love, hate, neutrality. That's all good. And information on my Facebook, Twitter, Google+, YouTube. I have Tumblr, but I rarely use that. And iHeartRadio. Okay, I'm on there as well. So that's all for now. And thanks for the time again to listen. And as always, my farewell address. Demoniac resistance is healthy for the soul and can liberate societies. Until next time, take care of yourselves, keep on spreading the love, and may your guardian spirits be with you.